I'm not given to hyperbole, but you really are about to witness two titans of the financial world. Sorry. And where I want to start is what's interesting is that both of you are doing things in the investment world right now that represent a pivot from where you spent the bulk of your career. And I'd like each of you to talk about that for a moment. And Jim, we'll start with you. Tell us what you're doing, how it's different from what you did before, and why you're doing it.
So business can cause a lot of problems, but it turns out it also can solve problems. For most of my career, I took on a set of problems. We built Ryanair in Europe. We turned around Continental Airlines. That was transportation problems. Then we took on pet problems. We built Petco. We took on transportation problems again with Uber, with Airbnb. But about 10 years ago, my partners and I asked a different question, which is, what if we took those skills with the edges and opportunities involved, and what if we put them against a different set of problems? Education, healthcare, financial inclusion, climate. And we've been doing that quietly for about 10 years. We actually haven't talked about it much. It's a platform called Rise. But let me unveil that a little bit today, because these take decades actually to build. Today, that platform is 86 companies operating in 82 countries. Total value of it would be over $100 billion. We serve 141 million students a year with educational outcomes. We drive 20 million healthcare visits that wouldn't otherwise happen. We serve 40 million families that could not get financial inclusion. And we take the equivalent of 200 million cars off the road a year through our climate work. And taking it down a level, what does that mean? We're saving kids' lives in Africa through a company called Zipline, delivers blood to clinics across Rwanda, Ghana. We are bringing 44 million Africans into the financial world through something called Airtel. We're serving 5,000 special need kids in the UK. We have an app called Food Smart that has 3.4 million Medicare users that it provides nutritional information to. We started a new university called InStride with ASU that serves 700,000 students while they're working at Uber, Starbucks, Aramark, and kids. It turns out there's all kinds of problems to solve. Pediatric dentistry, huge problem. We have a company called Blue Cloud, which fixed 60,000 kids' teeth last year. So this is a new set of problems done a different way. It's not most companies, the bigger they get, the more trouble they create for society in some ways through externalities. These are a set of companies that Tom and I are working on that the bigger they get, the better they do.
And before I come to Tom, are your investment considerations exactly the same as what you would have done at TPG in the previous decades, or are they different?
The world is too focused on or right now. I've been focused for a long time on the question of and. So we just created an and model. On the investment side, we hold these companies to absolutely the same returns that we would any other company. It's a crime not to. Because essentially, if you want to build a sustainable company, it has to have sustainable returns. What we do differently is we just add another arm, which we built an entire company based on outcome measurement. And for us to invest, it has to have returns and a measurable return in terms of impact. And that idea of just a dual model, it doesn't work for every business. It doesn't work for every businessman. But this idea of and is something that in this part of my career I'm working on.
It's interesting, Jim. It sounds like for the company you're investing in, the approach is the same. For you and your partners, the approach is slightly different. In other words, your mindset may be different. The outcome is not expected to be for the business. The investment outcome is not expected to be.
Yeah, Tom, I'm sure you agree. This is harder, right? So one of the reasons that we're doing this later on career is often people discover this type of investing early in their career. This is harder because you've added an entirely new area.
Great.
But what's interesting to me, Adam, is actually we thought when we did it would be an extra burden on the companies. The companies love it. Most of these companies founded in this era were mission-based companies, and they actually appreciate capital and investors that want them to keep the mission going. And because it's collinear with their impact, there's no conflict here. It's actually an accelerant.
Great. Tom, explain what you're up to, please.
Well, first of all, I think we should give Jim Coulter a hand. That was pretty amazing. Honestly.
Actually, that's it. We shouldn't be looking for a hand. We just got to do the work.
So let me say this. I'll describe something similar to what Jim did, but with a little bit different approach. So basically, I always believed that capitalism and democracy are what works. So being an investor for 30 years of my life, coming out of college and going through business school and starting a business, I felt like this is what works. Basically, this system is diffuse decision-making. So why is democracy better? Because people get to vote. So hundreds of millions of people in America get to decide our decisions, not 5 people in a room. And why is capitalism better? Because everybody gets to vote with their dollars. And so there's hundreds of millions of people informing the market about what they want on a daily basis based on their superior knowledge of what they and their families need and want. That is why capitalism is so powerful. It's real-time information, real-time price setting. That is why top-down economies can never compete with us. We have a much better model. And I thought as an investor, I am working in a system that has produced amazing goods. Jim was talking about capitalism solving problems. It does solve problems. And so I felt like if I'm part of this system, doing it in a high-minded, legal, ethical way, I'm part of a system that has produced amazing results for us and produced amazing results for literally billions of people across the globe. And what happened was our family went up to Alaska. I love the outdoors. I wanted to show them the most pristine part of North America, show them what it looked like before the Europeans showed up. And we all looked at it and said, yeah, it's amazing, except for one thing, it's melting. It's incredible. Can you believe what we're seeing here real time? So we came back to San Francisco and sat around a kitchen table and said, so maybe this is something we could help on. This is the kind of problem America can lead on because it's about understanding a problem, taking it on, coming up with solutions. We did a whole bunch of things. I spent 8 years not being an investor, just pushing for a robust American response to climate, saying this is our chance. In many ways, this is great for us. We can lead technologically, we can lead on business, we can lead intellectually and morally around the world. That's who we are. Let's do that. And at the end of 2020, I said, look, this argument's over. We've won the argument. Now we have to go implement what we're talking about and do what Jim was talking about. And so let me make one point about capitalism. And when you think about investment, and we want to be, at Farallon, we had a domain expertise, which was really focused on a different way of investing absolute return. So we brought a mindset to a whole bunch of different kinds of investment. Here we're bringing a knowledge about the energy transition to a whole different kind of verticals. But one thing about capitalism that I absolutely love the fact that it's diffuse decision-making, multiple sources of information, but your votes in capitalism are your dollars. So if you're thinking about, okay, we need to have a business that's going to work. You know what you need? You need customers. And you know what customers have to have? Money. And so when we look at a business, we're talking about the energy transition. How is this going to work from a business standpoint? Because as Jim said, capitalism, profits, scale. They answer big problems. The more successful you are, the bigger the problem is you can solve. But in order to have a successful business, you need revenues. And so when you're looking at, here's a problem. The Democratic Republic of Congo, 100 million people, 10 million of them have electricity. So it's like, well, there's a business problem. Yeah, there is a business problem. The other 90 million people do not have enough money to support the way that we generate electricity right now. So if you're going to do it as a business, you've got to be realistic. Jim said we hold the same standard of returns. We have to hold the same standard of returns because getting good returns is what grows.
I wish we didn't have to, but frankly,
otherwise you can't raise the money.
Philanthropy has a role, and we have a role, and we both have to be a little pure to it.
And so when we think about this, what Jim was saying is we're only going to bring this. Excuse me. We're only going to bring this mindset and these skills to problems that have measurable positive outcomes. But it's the same outcomes, it's the same measurements, It's the same discipline. It's the same rules.
Tom, pardon me for interrupting you. Give us an example of the types of things you're investing in now.
So it's funny because I was thinking about some of the problems, and I'm going to talk about much. We do real estate. We do a whole bunch of different verticals that take a lot of money. I wanted to talk about some of the little companies so that you'd know we're not just going to have to deploy the existing technologies. And I'll give you two examples. One of the big questions in the United States is, how is the grid going to hold more electricity? And that's a big problem because as we build renewable generation, you've got to get it on the grid to deliver it to people. So just having generation is great, but if you can't deliver it to people and businesses, it's useless. And there's an amazing backlog of getting those permitted new renewable operations onto the grid. Okay, the grid is 31.8% efficient. That is an amazingly low number. There is a business led by a guy who's incredibly knowledgeable about electricity, incredibly knowledgeable about the new forms of artificial intelligence, using that to take the efficiency of the grid from 31.8 into the 40s. If you look at what that's going to cost, it's an absolute fraction of rebuilding the grid. Even just using software and sensors, you can increase the carrying capacity of the grid by 50% at 1/12 the cost of rebuilding the grid. So when we look around the world, people keep thinking, we have a problem, let's use a 1950s solution. 1950s solutions are really slow and really expensive. And when we think about a 21st century problem, we're going to be using 21st century answers. I'll give you another really obvious thing. It turns out the seas are rising and there are a lot of floods. There are a lot of storms, people's houses get washed away. We own a shack at Stinson, which, one big wave is going to sweep into the lagoon. So everybody wants to build seawalls. And seawalls are basically big old walls of concrete where there's one point of impact. So there's a company out of North Carolina which is designing seawalls with new materials in different shapes so that, in fact, crustaceans and seagrass hook onto them. And so instead of having a seawall made of cement, they undulate much more. It's a new material. The grass and the crustaceans make it much stronger. And for that, a normal seawall takes 10 tons. This takes 1.1 tons of a different material, 1/10 as much material in a way that preserves the ecosystem of the bay and is a heck of a lot cheaper. They've gone from 2 million to 10 million, and their backlog is like 140 million bucks.
Jim, Tom a moment ago said that the argument is over, and I think you were referring to climate, the time you spend on climate change. I'd love to hear you two reflect on that. Is the argument over? Maybe the three of us and 99.9% of the people in the room would say so, but not everyone would.
Well, the argument is over from the standpoint of business. And I know that's not what you hear in the headlines. I know that's not what the head of the Secretary of Energy says. But when you look at costs, when you look at what it costs for electricity, when you look at what we're building around the world, last year, over 90% of new electricity generation was renewable. Over 90%, that's kind of game over. Let me just say one more thing about EVs. People in this country don't think the EVs are doing that well. But if you look around the world and you look at the cost of EVs and you look at the capabilities of EVs and you look at where people are building new plants to sell cars around the world, EVs are killing it.
The growth's massive, in other words, despite the headlines.
U.S. growth last year, I think, was 9%. European growth, 25%. Chinese growth, over 40%. Sorry, Jim.
Yeah, last year, $2 trillion was spent on clean energy, fossil fuels, total spending worldwide, under $1.8 billion. So we've passed fossil fuels at the edge. It's growing fast. 95% of the new energy in the U.S. was clean energy. I travel around the world. The Middle East gets it. India gets it. Europe gets it. I think there's a small place at the Oklahoma-Texas border where there is a real debate going on. But I'm not evangelical, and we shouldn't be evangelical. On the business side, we need to just find practical solutions. And the great news is, this is why Tom and I are here, is the numbers work today. Business can do its part. Early on, we needed charity. We needed policy. Now it's all of the above, and we're trying to get that going. And the problem is the rhetoric has changed. Don't ever for a moment mistake the rhetoric from what's actually happening. And on the ground, there's a lot happening. On the ground, there's a lot of positivity happening, and we have to kind of toughen up on the rhetoric side.
Let me say one thing. If you look at Texas, where the rhetoric is as pro-fossil fuels and as anti-renewable as you can be, they've tripled the amount of solar that they have over the last 3 or 4 years. They have more wind than anybody. They have much more renewable generation in Texas than we have here, and they're 3/4 of our size.
Yeah, we're investing, we just signed deals to do $40 billion of clean data centers in Texas. Right, this is of a scale we've never seen before. So things are happening. My point is that there's been a lot of tell in the business community about some of these issues. There's now, Tom and I haven't talked about it a little bit. There's got to be some show. And I'm hopeful that we can actually get the show accelerated, even if people are going to be quieter because they're afraid of getting criticized for doing what they're doing. I'm not afraid of being criticized. I'm not looking to be lauded. Let's just do it.
Oh, yeah. Explain what I'm curious to hear what you mean more about the showing. What are you referring to?
If we spend all our time as a business going to Washington and saying we need support, then and that's going to stop our business if we don't have support, we just actually have to go do it. To EVs, what's happening in China right now is there's a whole new way of doing EVs. Think of it like the consumer electronics model, and EVs are half the price of a fossil fuel car today in China. We think of EVs as something that is more expensive and we have to subsidize.
Luxury brand, yeah.
Actually, if we just do our work in business, imagine if an EV is half the cost, we're going to figure out charging because all of a sudden it doesn't need to be subsidized. So my point is if we do the work, and yes, there's parts for government to play, we need their help, but in the parts where we don't, let's just go and stop talking about it.
I think the other thing that I'm sure Jim has found, and I know I found too, going around the country and the world, is asking people to do something nice is very, very hard and not particularly successful. It was, just so you know, asking people to do something profitable is a completely different question. And so however nice people are in their verbiage, when it comes to making investments and taking risk, they're all bottom line people. Everybody's a bottom line person.
Yeah, in our world, we have 120 LPs, the major sovereign wealth funds of the world. Investors get behind it, but it's this dual mission. They like to do nice things. That's good, but we have to prove that we can deliver.
With the few minutes that we have left, I want to bring up the topic of, Jim, you talked about, for example, there were things that you did earlier in your career around pets, and that you're choosing not to focus on something like that now. My sense is you're not denigrating that. That was a perfectly good thing to do, but it's not where you're focused now. I want to hear each of you talk a little bit about. You both are fervent believers in capitalism, but there's downsides as well. How do you think about that? And how do you think about, you mentioned it very briefly, Jim, the role of government versus the role of business? Either order. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I in no way am denigrating. So what Tom and I earned through decades of doing this is the right and the opportunity to choose our problems. Mm-hmm. So we're just choosing these problems. Other people choose different problems. We should laud them, most of them. But normally when businesses grow, you're causing more problems because there's always externalities. So we always have to be responsible. There was something called ESG. ESG is do no harm. What we're trying to do is impact investing, which is invest in good. And we never can lose sight of business should be held accountable for doing no harm. But that's what regulation does. That's what, public action does. I just want to make sure we take all the tools and focus on building good. And we've earned the right to choose that. Not everyone has. But let's go pick our problems.
So I think one thing to know about capitalism is not an immoral system and it's not a moral system. It's an amoral system. And the rules and values of society shouldn't be written by people who own businesses. They should be written broadly by the people of the United States. That's why I also started by saying I believe in democracy and capitalism. Under capitalism, people should, and in a rule of law, do obey the law, and therefore they build things within the law that satisfies people's needs. That's what capitalism is, and it really scales. But let's be clear that our country has had laws that have permitted things that would curl our hair today. And one that we can all agree to that's not particularly sensitive, even though it was terrible, is, you used to be able to hire a 12-year-old, make him work a 14-hour day and pay him a quarter. And that was considered to be fine and dandy. And of course, nowadays, we'd be rightfully shocked and appalled at what the cost of that would be to our society. So what is right in society should be set by the people of the society. And capitalism within those dictates is an incredibly effective way of bringing about the needs of society. As Jim said, okay, pets. Jim built one of the huge pet care companies in the country. People love pets.
85% of people refer themselves as mommy or daddy with their pets. So
dogs.
This is a powerful economic engine.
So dogs make people happy. They really do. That's statistically true. So why is it bad to build a business that makes people happy? It's not bad at all. It's terrific. In this case, we're choosing to deal with specific verticals, specific areas where we feel like we need to work harder to solve problems specifically and be able to measure how those problems get solved.
To your point, I want to get off our soapbox. My point is that at a moment where we haven't talked about this type of work, maybe we can talk about it a little more, because if government's going to step back, maybe business can step forward in this way. And secondly, we just need to do the work. And I think that's what I'm taking away. Common sense, you're right, Jim. I was there at the beginning. It's powers that does the work. All the people in the work room here are doing the work. And if we keep focused on the work.
To end, I'll ask you both very briefly you've both devoted the past period of your careers to themes that in Washington, D.C. right now are unpopular. And you've said you want to do the work, not talk about those themes. What's one piece of advice to young people who are as interested in those themes as you are, who want to get into the financial world, for example, today? What's one piece of advice you have for them, both of you?
Let me go. Yeah. Well, what I say to people is you should do the work you love to do. And so if you want to be a screenwriter, be a screenwriter. If you want to be a banker, be a banker. If you want to be a teacher, be a teacher. What I say is, to me, bring your values to work. So if you're going to be a screenwriter, write about the things you think are important. Try and bring your values to what you're doing so that, in fact, part of what you're doing is participating in society in a positive way. And I think people should do what they love to do, because that's what they're going to do best, and that's how we all do best. But you shouldn't check your values at the door and do things that you aren't proud of.
Two things I'd say. One, codicil to that. I always tell people to figure out what type of problems they solve well. Some people solve people problems. Some people solve engineering problems. And go solve problems in the world, because sometimes people will pay you for it. And if you solve problems, you tend to feel better about yourself. And the other thing is beware shiny objects. Do the work, right? So, we can get, there's two words in our world. One is greenwashing, one is woke. Don't get worried by either one of them. Do the work that is, and just because someone is going to tell you it's the right thing to do, don't necessarily do it. And just because government's going to tell you it's the wrong thing to do, don't necessarily listen to that also.
Tom, Jim, thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam.